And we're back in the car like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your hopefully happy hump day afternoon here with me in New York. But once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. 32 years ago, today, it was a Friday, and it saw the release of a film which at the time was a considerable critical and box office disappointment. There are certain movies which are products of their time. There are certain movies which are simply ahead of their time. And this film, in a weird way, is both and neither. I don't necessarily know that it was ahead of its time, but it's closer to being ahead of its time than not. And it was a victim of expectations. It was a victim of timing. It was released a week after Jurassic Park, which, not surprisingly, cleaned up at the box office. Despite the fact that this film boasted, at the time, box office star number one in the world in seven-time Mr. Olympia, Arnold Schwarzenegger, it just didn't land at the right time, and audiences were expecting something else. And it happens in Hollywood where audiences get too caught up in what they think a movie is going to be, and when it turns out to be something other than that, they rebel, they don't see it, or if they did see it, they tell their friends it sucked. It happened 11 years prior with Blade Runner, which also had the misfortune of opening in the most jam-packed, science fiction-heavy summer. The Thing, Star Trek: The Wrath of Khan, E.T. the Extraterrestrial. There were too many terrific sci-fi films at the multiplexes. Well, in this case, it hurt this movie, which is John McTiernan's last action hero, which was not IP. This was not based on a comic book or a pre-existing piece of material. It was based on a screenplay written by two guys, Zach Penn, who ended up having a pretty big career himself, and Adam Leff, L-E-F-F. They wrote a screenplay called Extremely Violent, and it was supposed to be, what the movie ended up being, a kind of parody and a loving satire and send-up of the blow shit up real good action movies made by Sylvester Stallone, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Chuck Norris, and it was supposed to be poking fun while still telling an exciting, action-oriented type of a story. And the original script of Extremely Violent sold for a lot of money. I think it sold around 1990 or 91. I think those guys got close to $1 million, which, would be pretty good right now. But think about 35 years ago, how much more money. I always talk about time value of money and inflation adjusted, but in this case, you do the math in your head, and 1 million back then, it's probably 2.5 to 3 now. Again, relatively speaking, they got paid a ton of money. So the screenplay was worked on, it was shifted around, and Arnold Schwarzenegger's old friend from Predator and a great writer in his own right, Shane Black, who wrote the original Lethal Weapon. In fact, he got the part of Hawkins in the movie Predator because Joel Silver loved the Lethal Weapon script so much. He liked Shane Black's look. He said, you know what? Well, let's cast this kid. I like this. I think he can do it. And he's actually pretty funny in that film. Billy! I'm not going to do any of the jokes, but he has a couple of really tasteless X-rated jokes, but his telling of the jokes is so sincere, he kind of gets away with it. But Last Action Hero is a project that Arnold circled for quite some time. And you need to understand that time, which is Arnold was coming off of Terminator 2, which is what made him, he was close to being box office star number one after the successes of Twins, Total Recall, Kindergarten Cop. But Terminator 2, he seemed to connect with Generation X in a way that he had not really previously, which isn't to say that people like me didn't watch his movies, but Terminator 2, with the music video tie-in with Guns N' Roses, I mentioned it on a recent podcast with You Could Be Mine, he was on top of the Hollywood mountain at age, he's about 45 at the time. And so he had a number of very interesting projects that he was circling at that time. There was some talk that he was going to do a movie called Crusades for Ridley Scott. It's more or less what ended up being Kingdom of Heaven. It's not exactly the same script, but it's that project, was 20 years later, but it was going to have a lot of parallels with what became Kingdom of Heaven. Arnold was pondering working for Joel Silver again, doing an adaptation of a comic book series that he liked called Sergeant Rock, but Arnold was convinced it was a good idea, but the script just wasn't ready, and he didn't want to rush into production on something that wasn't ready. And then he had an idea for a silly comedy. I shouldn't say he had an idea. He had an idea that he wanted to do another silly comedy, and it was going to be called Sweet Tooth. This is another project that ended up getting made with someone else, the one where The Rock, was it The Rock or Vin Diesel, where they play the Tooth Fairy. Arnold was going to do that for Ron Underwood in the early 90s. Ron Underwood directed the first City Slickers, just for reference. And Arnold was fixated on this extremely violent retitled Last Action Hero, which Shane Black had given a couple of passes through. And Arnold agreed to do the film. The idea all along was summer 1993 release. That was the plan, and knew that they were going to be up against Michael Crichton's bestseller, and Spielberg was getting that together. That was a very long pre-production, not surprisingly, to get Jurassic going, figuring out what they were going to do with CGI versus model work, miniatures. How are they going to blend the two? What are we going to shoot on location? What are we going to shoot in a soundstage? A film like Jurassic Park, those questions are even more important than most movies. But Arnold agreed to do Last Action Hero. He thought that the script for what the Tooth Fairy movie, he thought it was a little bit too on the nose. He could see that it could work, but he just wasn't as keen on it as he had been, for example, on Kindergarten Cop, which he really loved that script. And obviously working with Ivan Reitman and Twins with Ivan Reitman, he wasn't sure. So he ended up doing Last Action Hero, or signing on, but he asked the studio, he said, I feel like there can be a little bit more done with the relationship, the key relationship in the film, which is between Arnold's character of Jack Slater, and the nominal lead of the film is a 12-year-old boy named Daniel Madigan, played really well by an actor whose career really never took off, Austin O'Brien. He was in My Girl 2, has pretty good chemistry with Anna Klumsky in that film. The film is really not that good, but the two of them look good together. But Arnold was convinced that they could do more with the relationship between this kid and the character Arnold played in Jack Slater. Now, in brief, if you don't know this film or you're not familiar with the twist, this is a movie within a movie kind of a story. The lead character is this 12-year-old boy, this kind of film geek, who idolizes a fictional character from the movies, Jack Slater, played by Arnold Schwarzenegger. But the kid is so in deep. I hate to say it this way, it's people who are they're so into like WWE that they just conveniently forget the fact that it is choreographed. Now, those guys are incredible athletes. I grew up a wrestling fan, but they act like the characters that they're playing are 100%. The matches are not choreographed, they're real. And this is how these people really are. They go from being good people to heels just because, and it's high drama and they love it. Well, in this kid of Danny Madigan, he does not ever identify Jack Slater as, well, it's played by Arnold Schwarzenegger. He presents as if, and he knows it's not, but that's how he presents. This character is his hero. This is his idol. And through a crazy series of circumstances in the film's first act, there is this magic ticket that was supposedly Houdini had it, and a great old actor who I love from Barry Levinson's The Natural, one of my favorite movies of all time. Robert Prosky plays a theater owner and projectionist. The theater is supposed to be in Times Square. And another kind of historical footnote, when this movie was made, Times Square was still bad. It was bad. It did not improve until just after this film was shot. It was really seedy and grimy, and you get that in this movie. So there's this idea of a magic ticket, and long story short, the kid ends up in a movie called Jack Slater 4. And then we go from there. He not only gets to meet his idol, Jack Slater, who does not know that he is a character in a movie played by Arnold Schwarzenegger. He's a cop in Los Angeles who's had all of these crazy madcap adventures, some of which have had tragic outcomes. It's important to note. For all of the light moments and all of the in-jokes and all of the references that only people like me get, the fact that they have Joan Plowright making a reference to Lord Laurence Olivier, who was her husband in real life. I mean, that goes over the head of almost anybody that, that isn't a savant, such as myself. But Last Action Hero, there were rumors in the mostly pre-internet era that the film was in trouble. And it really hurt me to read that, because I knew enough about how the movie business worked. Yes, there are times where the studios or people connected to the studios may have it out for a certain actor or filmmaker, meaning that they're almost hoping that they fail. But Arnold was very popular within the industry, and the way that some of the stories in Entertainment Weekly and Premiere Magazine, and I don't know about Film Comment, but certainly in those, and just random gossip pages discussing the movie business, Liz Smith, Cindy Adams, this sense was the way that the stories were being described. It didn't augur well for the film. But what I forgot to point out is Arnold wanted William Goldman to work on the script to try to enhance the relationship between Arnold's Jack Slater and Austin O'Brien's Danny Madigan. And in the same summer, in a movie that was released 3 weeks later, which was, no offense, a much better movie and was a huge box office hit without any equivocation, In the Line of Fire. The film, well, it's not a Clint Eastwood film. He stars in it. It's Wolfgang Petersen, who later did Air Force One, obviously a tremendous filmmaker, Das Boot. He's just one of the greats. But In the Line of Fire, Clint, not a director, not a producer, but he had some input. And in that story, the central relationship, well, there's two central relationships. One is a guy and a guy, and it's not a romantic component, and the other is a guy and a girl. The guy and the guy relationship is between Clint Eastwood's Frank Horrigan, a Secret Service agent who failed to stop the Kennedy assassination when he was a rookie. And now 30 years later, you have John Malkovich's Mitch Leary saying, I'm going to take a pop at the guy and you're going to fail again. You're going to be responsible for 2 dead. I won't even say the word out loud. You know what I mean? But the relationship in that film between Clint Eastwood's Frank Horrigan and phenomenal Renee Russo, best performance of her career as a top-level Secret Service agent, also on presidential detail. Her job is to protect the president, as is Clint's in the world of this film. So there was a romance component, but the studio was convinced that somebody could do better. So where Arnold Schwarzenegger immediately thought of William Goldman, that's the guy who wrote The Princess Bride, the novel and the screenplay. He wrote Marathon Man. He won an Oscar for Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. He won an Oscar, All the President's Men. That's the guy Arnold wanted to enhance the relationship between his character and the kid. Well, Columbia, TriStar, when they saw an opportunity, we can not just make a terrific action film with Clint Eastwood. We can make an all-time great thriller with a romance angle that is just as good and that is worthy of a story like this. They didn't ask for Bill Goldman, as he was known. They didn't get William Goldman. They got none other than Carrie Fisher. And Carrie Fisher did a 2-week polish, just focusing on the dialogue exchanges between Clint Eastwood's Frank Horrigan and Renee Russo's Lily Raines. And when I tell you their relationship works beautifully, I'm not exaggerating. And it's in large part due to Carrie Fisher. If the relationship between Arnold and the kid works in Last Action Hero, you can give credit to William Goldman. And there are some people that it's something they really like about the film, that it goes in a different direction, and that Arnold's character, he's more likable than he seems at first. The events of the story and starting to slowly get the idea that he may not be a real person, he may actually be a character in a movie. This kid is not crazy, he might be right. So Last Action Hero had these production issues where they seem to not figure out certain elements. And this is something that James Gunn recently talked about. Of course, Guardians of the Galaxy, now he's got the new Superman movie with David Corenswet and the Nicholas Hoult, who Clint just worked with in Juror Number 2. But the idea of starting to shoot a film without a locked-in screenplay, and somebody like James Gunn, who is a writer-director, this is in his wheelhouse. He's not talking out of school here. He knows exactly of what he speaks. Unfortunately, it is something that has gone on for as long as there have been movies, that they sometimes don't know exactly what they're going to do. It's not that they don't have a script, it's that there's stuff that they're not going to end up using, and if you make adjustments, then you might be a little lost and a little bit at sea, and now what do we do? So the way the reports were coming back from Last Action Hero, they were having a lot of trouble figuring out how to present the third act, which we got the idea was going to be Arnold's character in the real world. And how do we do this in a way where it just doesn't become fucking stupid? They did reshoots, they test screened, and the screenings went okay. But when you start reading these kinds of things, it's just not good. And Arnold wanted to be as involved as possible. Yes, he was making a ton of money, but he really wanted the movie to succeed, not just for his career, but he saw something in the script that people were going to respond to. So when the film was wrapped, when it landed, the studio was confident that the film was going to get decent reviews, and the reviews were just okay. And what I was saying about audience expectation, my dad and I and my sister, we saw Jurassic Park the weekend it opened, which, as I said, was the previous weekend. Jurassic Park opened, and you can Google this, June 11, 1993. That was the same summer Dave was still in the multiplexes, the Kevin Kline film, which is just a phenomenal film. That was in my dad's top 5 favorite movies of all time. Dave and Fargo, one movie from 93, one from 96, would have been in his top 5. Boy, did he love the movie Dave. He must have watched it 25 times. But we saw, my dad, just he and I, we saw Last Action Hero on opening night. And we did not like it. And when I tell you I am as big an Arnold fan as anybody, with the bodybuilding and, idolizing his discipline and his life, coming over here as a young man who was already a bodybuilder and just, tearing it up, winning all the Mr. Olympias, and then becoming what seemed to be just going to be a big action star. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but then he just became a global icon even before that was a thing. I was a huge fan. I loved Terminator 2. I saw it 3 times in theaters. I thought that The Running Man was fantastic. I loved Twins. I even liked, Kindergarten Cop's not really that great, but the first Terminator was great. Total Recall was an incredible movie. I wanted to love Last Action Hero. And oddly enough, my dad liked it more than I did. If you had asked him when we left the theater, what would you give it out of a 4-star rating system, like the kind of old school method, Roger Ebert, guys like that, Dad would have given it 3. He liked it. I was really lukewarm. There were certain elements that I loved, the in-jokes, and the incredible idea that because it's a movie within a movie, Arnold Schwarzenegger is not Arnold Schwarzenegger in the world of Jack Slater. So when the kid thinks he's going to crack the case and say, bro, you're a fucking actor, he shows him a poster for Terminator 2. Spoiler alert, it's actually Sylvester Stallone playing the T-800. When that in the theater, it was a pretty big crowd that night. We were screaming. That was definitely the highlight of the film. That is the single funniest. That's one of the best moments of any movie, of any film from the 90s. That was just so good to see it. And Sly gave it right back. This was the part in their careers where they were kind of starting to thaw, and Arnold never had an issue with Stallone. It was Stallone that was jealous that Arnold was getting to work with Jim Cameron and all of these other big people, like Verhoeven. Stallone was a little bit jealous. He didn't have anything to be jealous about, but that's the gist I've always gotten from various interviews with the guys. But there was a rivalry. They were on friendly terms in the 80s. Franco Columbu worked with Stallone, I think, to get ready for Rambo, or maybe it was Rambo 3, and that was Arnold's best friend. So they were not like enemies, but they did have that rivalry, the whole thing where Arnold pretended he was interested in doing Stop or My Mom Will Shoot. Now it's just funny because the guys, they're getting up there. Stallone is gonna be 79 soon, and Arnold is up there. But that was beautiful. And then Sly giving it right back to Arnold in Demolition Man when there's all this talk about the Schwarzenegger Memorial or Presidential Library, and Stallone's reaction when Sandra Bullock is talking about how he was president, the way Sly goes, oh, stop, president. The way he goes, president, like he's almost looking at the audience like, president, this guy? Just great stuff. So Last Action Hero did not really turn a profit. Relatively speaking, it did better overseas than in the US, but the word of mouth wasn't there because people like me, who were supposed to be the target audience, I wasn't even 20 years old. I was still a teenager when this movie came out. I told people I didn't think it was that good. I was disappointed. Even though I knew what it was going to be on my way into the movie, my expectations still weren't met. I didn't realize it was going to basically be a satire, that was really the point. And it obviously gets into a multiverse decades before the MCU. The idea that in the world of this film, Sylvester Stallone, it's a different iteration of Stallone. Maybe he's just an action star. Maybe the Rocky movies don't exist. We don't know. It doesn't really matter. But the film did not really connect with audiences. It didn't do great at the box office and was considered a failure. And this is where you get into the phrase that I use when I talk about how certain films are well remembered by history and others aren't. Last Action Hero, ironically, is very well remembered by history. And in this context, what I mean is people seeing the film for the first time now, they don't have the same kinds of expectations that audiences heading into the multiplexes in the summer of '93 had. And if you go on YouTube and you check out some of the top movie reactors, whether it's Popcorn in Bed or TBR Schmidt, Popcorn Roulette, some of the other channels, they all love this movie. They haven't seen it. They might be familiar with Terminator 2 or Total Recall, but they think the film is fantastic without the weight of expectations and, okay, it's an Arnold Schwarzenegger film and we've liked everything he's done, that sort of thing. People seeing it now are saying, how could this not have been a bigger hit? This is perfect. It's somewhat family friendly. I mean, I think it was PG-13. And there's actually even a running gag that at one point in the movie, Arnold can't drop an F-bomb because this movie is rated PG-13. That was another moment that got a big laugh. It also has cameos from almost everyone in the business who Arnold was on friendly terms with, and in some cases just people who didn't even really like him but decided, you know what, I'm going to do him a favor because this is a great idea. So he got Danny DeVito to supply the voice of a cop who is actually a cartoon cat. I don't even know how that works, but he plays an important character. F. Murray Abraham is actually not a cameo, it's a supporting role, and that gets laughs for movie buffs because if we know our history, he played Salieri, and what did he do? He killed Mozart. So as soon as little Daniel Madigan sees F. Murray Abraham, he's playing a guy called John Practice, I think, or Practice. Arnold pronounces it with a B, but I think his name is just supposed to be Practice. As soon as the kid sees him, he goes, don't trust him. Don't trust that guy. Well, what do you mean? I've known him for years. Why shouldn't I trust him? He killed Mozart. Just great. And fantastic actor who many of the more recent generations know from Game of Thrones, Charles Dance. Charles Dance plays who we think is a henchman, but spoiler alert, he ends up being the primary villain. And when I tell you he gives an incredible performance, the movie is worth seeing just for him. Every time he is on screen, he is electric, and you just don't know what he's going to do. He has a moment in the real world where he realizes how craven and how horrendous this world is relative to the sanitized fuckery that he has left behind. And he is like a kid in a candy store. And all of that joy and menace and anger and criminality, it's all there in the performance. And another terrific actor, it's not really a cameo, Tom Noonan, who played Francis Dollarhide in the original version of Red Dragon with Joan Allen and was it Brian Cox and William Peterson. Man, Tom Noonan is creepy as hell in this film, in Last Action Hero. But as far as the cameos, some are just random, You have, Jean-Claude Van Damme randomly showing up saying, I wouldn't miss. Oh, the film climaxes at the premiere, the New York City premiere of Jack Slater 4. I don't know why it took me so long to get to that. And so Jack Slater, who has now crossed over into the real world, not surprisingly, he runs into Arnold Schwarzenegger, not surprisingly, playing himself, and Maria Shriver is there, and she kind of rips on him, and it's all great. Damon Wayans has a cameo, Chevy Chase has a cameo, Jim Belushi, Arnold's old buddy from Red Heat that they did together. There are all of these incredible cameos in the film, but the two best cameos come relatively early in the movie, as Arnold is now inexplicably partnered with a 12-year-old kid. Yeah, that could only happen if you're in a movie, right? You're going to send the kid to a foster home. He's not going to be a cop. But that's where we are in the world of the film. So Arnold is taking him to police headquarters. And a great actor, Frank McRae, plays the kind of screaming, wrong-headed commanding officer that you see in movies like Clint's Dirty Harry and Stallone's Cobra. So he takes the kid to the LAPD, which is a lot nicer in the world of this film. And that was also kind of we're having a few laughs at how funny it is. It looks so pristine. It doesn't really look like this. So he's taking the kid into the police station. And standing outside the police station is Catherine Trammell wearing a white dress and lighting a cigarette. You say, well, who the hell is that? That's the character from the movie Basic Instinct, played by Sharon Stone. Sharon Stone played what? She played Arnold's wife in Total Recall. She and Arnold supposedly didn't get along that well during the making of the film, but I feel like if I think it was more that Sharon didn't like him in that instance, but it doesn't really matter. Arnold asked her personally, Sharon, could you come down and do a cameo? I have this idea. And she thought it was such a great idea. She said, yeah, I'm in. Let's do it. So he's walking into the police station, and there is Sharon Stone as Catherine Trammell from Basic Instinct over there. And as they're about to walk in, out comes Robert Patrick's T-1000 from Terminator 2, walks right past Arnold's Jack Slater. That was great. Just phenomenal. So Last Action Hero, it started to find its audience by the time I was in film school, which was, a year and a half after this movie came out. By the time I was in film school, it was understood people had missed the boat. This was not a disappointment. This was not a failure. Yeah, it may have been a failure financially relative to the rest of Arnold's, big movies. But this was an artistic triumph for John McTiernan. Audiences just weren't ready for it. They just didn't want this film at that particular time. And now, all of these decades later, you won't find anybody who says, oh, this movie sucks. Everybody says the word, it's underrated. It's actually a masterpiece. It's one of Arnold's, 2 or 3 best performances, the way that he tries to, connect and interact with the kid. It's just terrific. And Anthony Quinn plays the crime boss, who you think is going to actually be the big bad, but he's more just blustery. He's a fucking clown, really. Art Carney plays Arnold's favorite second cousin, Frank, and he's only in the movie for a couple of minutes. But this is one of those films that unfortunately was a product of a time that audiences weren't ready for this sort of parody, for this sort of satire. They wanted Arnold to have made this sort of movie, but that it was going to be a straightforward actioner. Although I don't know how they would have done it with a 12-year-old kid getting blown, no pun intended, getting blown into the movie, and how is everybody going to get back home? But Last Action Hero, released 32 years ago today, a disappointment at the time, but I would argue that you could rank it among Arnold Schwarzenegger's 5 best movies, and you wouldn't necessarily be wrong. It's not in the top 3. Terminator 2, Total Recall, and Terminator 2, Total Recall, and Predator. That's got to be the top 3. But if you want to slot Last Action Hero after True Lies, I would have True Lies 4th and Last Action Hero 5th. No problem. It is a terrific film, and I am glad that history kind of caught up to it, that people don't talk about it in defamatory terms the way they did. I remember at the Oscars in '94, there was a laugh line. I think it was Whoopi Goldberg was the MC that year, but there was a laugh line where there was a clip of Arnold talking about it and saying that it was one of the best scripts he ever read. And people in the audience laughed as if, boy, he got that one wrong. But you know what? Just because something's a great script doesn't mean it makes a great movie anyway. But Last Action Hero, to me, is at least a 3.5-star movie. I came around on it. I had to sit through it 2 times, 3 times, a 4th time before it finally registered just how clever, ingenious, and just how much fun this movie is. That Arnold, yes, he's blowing shit up real good, but he has a twinkle in his eye, and he seems to have really had a great time making the film, and his joy of being the world's biggest movie star at the time. It's apparent in every frame in the film that he is in. Last Action Hero, released on this day, 1993, directed by John McTiernan, and starring Arnold Schwarzenegger, Austin O'Brien, Charles Dance, Anthony Quinn, Art Carney, Tina Turner, Frank McRae, Charles Dance, and Danny DeVito. This has been episode 568 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all so much for spending some of your happy hump day afternoon here with me in New York. If you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, or the others in which we're hosted, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Till then, peace.